Lesson 1. You're running out of time. Here I have arrived in August 2022, and the clock is ticking. At this moment, it should be quite obvious to every conscious soul that this existence has arrived at a crossroads. The path taken will dictate the type of world your children will inherit, so choose wisely. Would you like to have a world of peace and abundance, or a world of caste hierarchy, where the few rule the many? Do you want to be free to explore and experience all that this reality has to offer, or subjugated and ruled? If you think this is an overstatement of your current situation, I would strongly suggest you consider what your life was like 5 years ago and compare that with what your life is like today. Do you enjoy more abundance or less? Do you have more freedom or less? Are you allowed to have your own thoughts and opinions, or must you comply with the group? When you think about your future, are you filled with excitement and anticipation, or fear and uncertainty? For some, you may already be aware of the dull indistinctness clouding your everyday life. It is hard to focus and stay with your goals, hard to find your place and purpose. You see, a lot of planning went into getting you to this point. The herd has an inertia and can neither be quickly stopped or turned without the risk of those at the front being trampled, so changes and adjustments must be made gradually. The pack leaders realize that by using small, key inputs, it is possible to steer the entire herd to their desired destination. Those in the back are lost in a sea of dust, only able to follow what they see immediately surrounding themselves, never really having a clear idea of exactly where they are being led, be it the abundance of the grasslands or the terror of the river. As timekeeper, I enjoy the luxury of future hindsight. I get to witness the ripple effect of a simple, single decision. I get to experience the joy when those decisions lead to triumph and greatness, and the deep sorrow when they lead to pain and suffering. Normally, my role is that of an observer. My charge, to keep the time and watch the clocks, all while preserving a record of events. In my future, it is of great importance to learn the details of the specific events that led to that outcome. It is because of this that I now make my presence known, to provide a warning of things that are coming to pass, and guidance on how to prevent unnecessary tragedy. You see, your timeline is a casino of probabilities, not completely random, but not completely deterministic either. If it helps, think of yourself as a blackjack player in that casino. While it's true that it is a game of chance, with some training and discipline, you can give yourself tools to improve your odds of success. I am here to give you some of those tools. Measurement. Let's begin with the simple question. Is it possible for you to know how to get to your destination if you don't know where you are right now? Of course, you could always pick a random direction and hope that things work out, but the truth is that without a map, a guide, or some other decision aid, the chances of arriving are slim. In this time, many of you have no idea where you are, mentally, spiritually, or even physically in some cases. You live in a period of confusion and disorientation. Whether this has occurred by random forces of universal chance or by a more devious design will be written into your future's history, but the immediate problem remains determining your location and finding your way toward your desired destination. In your corporeal form, you live in a realm of constraints. You can only run so fast, jump so high, or live so long. In fact, if you think about it, all achievements are marked by some form of measurement. The world loves to extol its praises to the tallest building, the smartest person, the fastest machine, all of which is based on establishing a definition of success and then agreeing on its measure. Without this agreement, we cannot determine success. If you don't believe me, take a moment and tell me if the height of the tallest building should include the tip of a spire. Does an antenna count? What is the difference between an antenna and a spire? If there's no agreement on measure, we will include spires but not antennas for instance, then we cannot achieve the desired outcome, agreement on the tallest building. But we also need something more, agreement on a starting point. Should the peak of a mountain be measured from sea level or the ocean floor? I once had a wise teacher who asked the class if anyone knew what the D in D-Day stood for. If you search for the correct answer, you'll find a myriad of suggested possibilities, with no one being more right than another. But for the purposes of his class, the teacher stated that the D stood for datum. Don't be surprised if you're unfamiliar with this term, as it's most commonly used in technical settings to describe a reference surface, a surface from which values can be measured. In the teacher's version, this datum would be the starting point for the Allies' measurement of the liberation of Europe, a foothold from which to establish the metrics of success. D is for datum, the baseline for measurement. Let's expand on this concept with a less obvious example. Take this moment and reflect upon a time you experienced a beautiful sunset. Form that picture in your mind. Study the details of the moment. Now that you have a visual representation, add more sensory inputs. What was the temperature? Was there a smell in the air? What time of year was it? What did it feel like? Create a composite of all of these features and form a hold of that memory. Now that you have the snapshot, let's consider the following scenario. You've just started a job as a substitute teacher at a school for individuals that have physical and mental challenges. You walk into a classroom and are introduced to someone who is blind and has a poor sense of touch and smell. Your first task is to explain to this person what it's like to experience a sunset. How would you accomplish this? Is it enough to simply explain colors to someone who cannot see? What about the warmth or coolness of the air, or the fragrances of that moment? Is this even possible to do, and where would you start? Clearly, this is not a simple task, but it occurs to you that every observation in your concept of a sunset is a measurement. Colors are really just representations of light wavelengths in the brain as observed through the eyes. Warmth or coolness is based on a body's measurement of ambient heat energy through nervous system receptors. Smell is observation of molecular samples brought into the brain through olfactory sensors. All of these measures are composited to form a sunset, which is then stored in your brain for future recall. Then you start to ponder this idea a little further, and you realize that what makes a sunset unique is the fact that these measures contrast from other periods of the day or physical environments in which you find yourself. Something about the sunset is measurably different than these other moments in time, and you realize that what you are actually doing is establishing, subconsciously, a datum from which you are measuring these values. The colors are different than your office cubicle was an hour ago, being much more varied and vivid. The smells are different than the teacher's lounge, earthy and natural versus a dank manufactured smell. To convey this to the student, you now have to establish a common datum that they can apply for measurement. Since the student is blind, you may start with senses you share, such as sound, touch, or smell, even if it is degraded for them. You can go on to explain that the visuals represent a departure from your normal observations by being more brilliant. You could also describe emotional states, such as calmness and contentedness, a shared ability of measure. Though you may never be able to fully communicate the complexity of your personal experience, you have successfully given the student some idea of your interpretation through the establishment of a common datum from which to measure. Why is the datum important, and how do we create one? This concept of the datum is critically important in this period of manufactured relativism. Great conflict has erupted among the souls inhabiting this time regarding concepts of ethics, morality, and spirituality. This has spilled over into the political institutions, schools, and general social structure. Long-held beliefs are being challenged by those attempting to remake their definitions, without any justification of whether this is beneficial or harmful, because there is no objective measure of these values being put forward. The truth is, humanity has reached a schism, a fracturing that is causing great strife and angst as sides begin to form and galvanize, each confident in their right. The course taken from here can either be one of constructive growth, benefiting both the material and spiritual world, or a destructive path of conflict and subjugation, and the clock is ticking. You see, you've lost something, or more appropriately, it has been taken from you. What you've lost is your ability to conduct objective measurement, and by extension your ability to perform basic logical reasoning. The debate of how that happened will be addressed in future lessons, but the consequence is the same. Your decision-making has been compromised. Not me, you say? Let's take a look. You vote corrupt leaders into office who engorge themselves on your resources, telling yourselves that your candidates are better than the others, that they are the ones who actually care about the people, even as you watch them hold extravagant parties and enrich themselves and their friends with the treasure of others. You watch as businesses abuse the planet and its people for profit, but yet you still get in line to buy the newest smartphone that enables this behavior and offers you absolutely no more quality of life than your previous one did. You give a platform to celebrities who proffer their opinions about the environment just before they board private jets to yet another exotic destination on their permanent vacations. Enough of the lecture, you get the point. Reason and logic would tell you to get away from this as fast as you can, but you don't. You've lost your ability to reason because you've lost your ability to measure. You don't know where you are, and you don't know where you should be going. Without defining these two criteria, it is impossible to determine a set of directions for your journey. So let's figure out how to do that. Choosing the right criteria. The sunset again. To describe your mental picture of the sunset to the challenged student, you were forced to define criteria that could be used for measurement. Those criteria had to be something in common so that both parties could accept them. The blind student cannot accept color as a measurement, but can understand the concept of intensity as it relates to other senses. It is a shared ability. Feelings are also a shared measure. The blind student can still feel warmth and even intangible ideas like happiness. So the key is to establish those common measures and then compare them to an established datum. The sunset may be more brilliant and vivid than other times of the day in its ability to more sharply define shapes and colors. It may feel more tranquil than at noontime as the evening air cools and ambient sounds begin to quiet. The datum is the starting point, the time when the sun is not setting. In this case, the criteria for measurement are sound, feeling, intensity, and emotion. The destination is the description of the criteria at the time of sunset. The change between the two time periods is the journey. When you were first tasked with describing the sunset to the student, you didn't know where you were, feeling a little overwhelmed and confused at the request. Measure a sunset? You probably had never even considered it before. But by creating and applying a datum, measurement criteria, and a defined destination, you created the tools to complete your journey. So where are you now? How do you define the current state of your life? How do you know if decisions will lead you to your desired destination if you don't know where you are? Do your choices affect the path of others? And if so, do you have a right to do that? Can you follow your individual timeline without impacting the group or vice versa? The truth is, you've entered a time where, by design, you are being told that the group is more important than the individual. This is done by reinforcing terms like the common good or the needs of the many, all of which are used to advance agendas which can and will interfere with your ability to reach your destination. What is the common good? What are the needs of the many? Are these more important than individual needs? If so, why? And who decides? These statements have no objective measure, no datum for reference, and no criteria defining success. Do you see the problem? The fact is that these are relative, fluid concepts that, by design, can be adapted to suit an agenda. How do you measure common good? Is the common good of this moment the same as the common good 10 years ago? And what are the criteria being used to determine these values? When do the needs of the many become wants? Do you need a home or just want one? Do you need a raspberry smoothie or just want one? Who defines what a need is and when it becomes a want? How is this consensus achieved? Are you ever consulted? This is a tough question, so let's establish a datum and set criteria to try and measure some results. Only then can we evaluate a choice for success or failure. Physically, humans require 3 basic categories to live: Sustenance, food and water. We're taking breathable air as a given here. Shelter, protection from exposure. Health and hygiene. If this was provided as a baseline societal goal for the common good, where every member of the human race were provided these three things, sustenance, shelter, health, and hygiene, would there be peace on earth? If these were provided to you, would you feel fulfilled and complete? Could you die and state that it was enough to simply live a life where everyone's basic needs for survival were met? I think the answer is self-evident. So if those are the basic needs, does that make everything else a want? How would you objectively define that? And can you achieve consensus? Much like the sunset problem, you are now tasked with objectively measuring a qualitative value and then placing a weight on its importance. Using our datum, criteria, and destination protocol, let's look at another example. The water problem. Only human beings could live on a world that is 2/3 covered with water and still have a water problem. In various regions, a lack of clean, pure drinking water is perceived as a major cause of disease and subsequent death, especially among children. Remembering that since we defined water as a basic need for humans in our datum, should there be a collective focus on providing clean, pure water to everyone in the world who does not have it readily available? Surely the human race is capable of providing access to clean drinking water. The answer may seem obvious, but as we shall see, the devil lies in the details, or more appropriately, the criteria by which we measure success. To begin, we must reach consensus upon the fact that there is a lack of clean drinking water available to all those who need it, regardless of location or circumstance. This would likely be a difficult task, but let's assume that we, as a race, collectively agree on this premise. We must then define how much drinking water must be made available as a requirement for life. We also need to agree that these populations are unable to provide water for themselves, and that it is the burden of others to provide this access. We have to agree that time and resources allocated to this goal have a heavier weight than applying them to another set of needs or wants for the common good. We also have to confirm that by providing this access, no current supply is disrupted that would result in negative consequences, which we would also have to define and agree upon, to another population. But is that all we need to move forward? How would we know if we are successful in our goals? Creating new wells, distribution systems, or delivering water regularly would seem to solve the problem, but in reality is not in and of itself a definition of success, unless the criteria is the placement of wells, distribution systems, and water delivery. What we are really talking about here is a reduction in disease that causes an increase in child mortality. In essence, the criteria of success is a measured reduction in deaths, a tangible, observable, and quantifiable value. So we have to agree on a measure which can successfully tell us if we have achieved our objective, a reduction in deaths due to the lack of availability of clean drinking water. This seems reasonable, but is it? If this takes place and the child mortality rate goes down, will we have reduced the amount of deaths? Let's consider the fact that many of the regions also suffer from a lack of resources, such as food or arable land to support their populations. Since there are less child deaths, we can assume that populations will rise, putting strain on other social needs and wants. Here's a simple question. When humans are competing for resources, is it typically done in a peaceful, congenial manner, or by force? What would be the outcome in many of these regions, and did we actually achieve the goal of reducing deaths? Is it a success to save 1,000 lives at a future cost of 100,000? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on our criteria. The point of this hypothetical exercise is not to get caught up in a debate of the ethics or morals of the value of human lives, but rather to show the importance of defining a proper datum and measurement criteria when approaching a problem, and understand that there are often hidden complexities in what seem to be obvious solutions. Objective measurement is a key concept here. While you may feel better by donating money to a fund that sponsors well drilling in certain regions, how would you feel to know that it led to mass starvation and war as a result of overpopulation in 20 years? To be sure, mistakes can and will be made, but did we ask the right questions to begin with? Food for thought. The datum is the keystone. Because you cannot travel back in time, any action taken can only begin in this or at some future moment. You are where you are. And where is that? You are in a time of manufactured conflict and crises revolving around ambiguous concepts that are difficult to measure. You are in a time of intentional blurring of moral and physical truths, replacing them with relativism and nihilism. You are in a time ruled by emotion instead of thought. You can inherently feel that something is wrong, but are unsure about how to act upon it. How do you even begin to address this? Start by establishing a datum for your own life. Are you happy? Are you where you want to be? Are you using your limited time to its most productive purposes? What are those purposes? Are you a burden to others? Are you your brother's keeper? Have you taken the time to define the criteria of how you can measure these concepts? Or do you rely on feelings and emotion? Are the things that make you happy measurable? Are the things that make you unhappy measurable? If you answer in the negative, maybe you need to look at the criteria you are using to measure. Measurable results give you actionable data. Feelings do not. Now let's move to the whole. Is the human race living up to its potential? Do your leaders have your best interests at heart? Do they serve the people or themselves? Are you working together to peacefully and productively solve problems? Does it make sense to continue to invest in the current system if it doesn't serve your wants and needs? At the macro level, what metrics are being presented to evaluate the success or failure of human endeavors? Can you see the measured results of actions taken? Is the world getting cleaner? Is there less conflict? Is there less suffering? Do your leaders profit from this ambiguity? Is it intentional? If a machine is not functioning to perform the service for which it was intended, you would take steps to repair it. You would troubleshoot the problem based on criteria that define its successful function. And if beyond repair, you would remove and replace it with something that accomplishes those goals. This can be applied in all areas of your life and serve as a template for reason and honest debate in decision making. The datum is the current function of the machine. The parameters indicating success are the criteria for measurement. The end result is the destination. Objective measurement based on an established datum is the key to success. It is a powerful tool. Use it to return your life to logic and reason. The minute hand is approaching midnight.